Thank you, everyone, for joining. Hopefully, we have some stuff to share. I know that everyone's been going through quite the year. 2020 has been a very challenging year, and many of us have been stretched and strained to perform in new ways, or we've been given extra responsibilities. Really, parents have been given just about every responsibility. And for anyone who has a child with special needs, you know how many people are involved in getting your child the education that they need. It takes a lot of people, and with the pandemic as it is, a lot of that has fallen on to parents. So I'm hoping that through this talk, I help empower you with some helpful tools and open a connection. If you ever want to reach out about anything, I'm always free to take calls and to kind of troubleshoot on an individual basis. So, okay, with that said, my name is Benjamin Gonzalez. I'm a board certified behavior analyst. I've been working in the field of ABA, which is applied behavior analysis, for the last 10 years now. I started off, I basically had every single role within this field. I started off, I had no idea what this was, but I had worked as a camp counselor in college, and this field sounded interesting, so I got into it and I loved it. It's very unique. You get to work with families in a very intimate manner. Most of my experience outside of the school has been working in the home, so I've gotten to know just about every type of person and every kind of kid. And what's awesome about this job is that you always meet that other kid or that other family who lets you know that you really don't know everything at all. And everything is so individualized. So I've really fallen in love with this field. Currently, I'm the director of school-based services at Learning and Behavior Center. We're located in Tarzana, California. And we've had to learn how to shift completely from an in-person model to a completely distance learning model. And I would love to share kind of the strategies that we're recommending with our staff and with our families. And, you know, this isn't information that we want to keep hidden. We want everybody to know it. And once again, this is my contact information here. Feel free to write it down. This is my work email and my personal email, and a direct line to call or text me if you ever have any questions or are wondering what behavioral services look like, what the IEP process is like, any of those more in-depth questions. I'm always happy to take a call and answer questions more specifically. And then as we kind of go, feel free to either chat questions or just cut me off completely. I actually don't mind. I like things to be interactive, and it's a little different with Zoom being the way it is, but I like interactive trainings as we go. So what do we actually do as a behavior analyst? So unfortunately, I think ABA has gotten some different stories or different reputations. Sometimes I run into people and they're like, oh, ABA, you know, I've had a bad experience with that. And I always feel very bad because my only experience has really been working as a independent practitioner and working with the people that I've worked with and the families that I have, and knowing just there is a way to do it right. And I think that there sometimes is a way of, some people can have a bad experience, but I'm always like, you know, sometimes you go to a dentist and you have a really bad dentist and you have a bad experience, but it doesn't necessarily mean the field is completely bad. But really what we do is we take the science of behavior and we look to make socially significant changes in people's behaviors that improve the quality of lives for not just the kids that we work with, but also the families. So we're not really looking to change things just to change things. We're looking to make a meaningful impact. And so we take the science of human behavior to do that. So I kind of always view us as the good guys in the field of behavior sciences, because most of behavior science, unfortunately, is being used to sell people things. But we're actually trying to help special needs kids and work with the populations that oftentimes get overlooked. And I think in distance learning right now, one of the biggest populations that might be overlooked in a sense is the special needs population. So this is where we've been spending all of our time and really looking to focus. So yeah. Okay, so getting into things. So really the overarching theme of this presentation and behavior in general is that you cannot change anyone's behavior. Really all you can do is change your own behavior. So I love this quote. It's the sign of great parenting is not the child's behavior, the sign of truly great parenting is the parent's behavior. Really, all we can control is how we respond to things. So I'll probably use this analogy multiple times, but it takes two to tango. And when you're, I'm inviting you guys all into my home right now, somewhere where I might not normally do a public speaking thing, but I play a lot of music. I grew up playing all kinds of instruments and everything. And when you're playing music with other people, it takes two people to be in alignment, or three people to really know what their role is, where the space is, things like this. And really what it comes down to with behavior is we all play our role, and understanding what role we're playing helps us improve somebody else's behavior by really just focusing on our own behavior. So hopefully by the end of this, that will make a little bit more sense. So, okay, the agenda for today, we're gonna go over the basics of behavior. I really want everybody to understand that there is a science of behavior, and it's not super complicated, even though the application of everything gets complicated. But I really want to give everyone the tools here to be able to see your child's behavior or your spouse's behavior, even though I recommend not doing that vocally because they will get upset. But really just having the tools to see what's happening, understand what you can tweak and change, and how you can affect things in that way. Also, behavior is communication. Everything that we do is communicating something to another person. There's been a bunch of various studies, and over the numbers vary, but it's like 80 to 90% of all human communication happens without the use of words. So if anyone has a child with special needs who doesn't have a lot of verbal behavior, their behavior is verbal. They are telling you something. And once again, when you know what there is communicating, it allows us to be able to teach better replacement behaviors for that. And then finally, being proactive and not reactive. So something that I always stress to parents and my own staff is you are the expert of your children. You are with them literally every minute of the day these days. And you know exactly what makes them tick, what motivates them, every little thing about them. So hopefully with this training, you'll be able to shift the perspective and recognize that you actually are the expert. You have all the tools and you have all the knowledge that you need to make those small changes that can lead to really big outcomes. Okay, but first a moment of acknowledgement. I always want to start with just, this has been a really tough year, and I think we're all, stumbling across the finish line in 2020. I remember this time last year and everyone's like, good riddance 2019, like on to the next one. And it has been a really tough year, and we've all had to adapt so quickly that I don't think we've even realized how much we've all grown because of this necessity to change. But let's just all take a quick moment to acknowledge that it sucks. And then we'll move on and become solution-based, which is, I'm always like, you know what, we know why things can't work, but how can we make things work? So we'll be solution-based today as well. Okay, so we're gonna go to the basics with understanding behavior, and this all comes back to the ABCs. So this is when I have new hires coming in and we're doing a training, this is where I always start, because this is the foundation of everything that we do and everything that we filter things through. And this teaches you why your child is acting the way they do. But this isn't just about your child's behavior. Once again, this is human behavior and it applies to everything. So I encourage you to try and apply this to your own behavior and see how that happens. Sometimes it's a little bit difficult to do with yourself. Okay, so behavior does not happen out of nowhere. So behavior happens within a context, and this is the context that we're going to be reviewing. I want everyone to think about the behavior of you all being on this Zoom call right now. I'm guessing you didn't just type in a random meeting ID and hop onto something and Zoom bomb this thing that might be a helpful presentation. No, there was probably some email sent out, a flyer. Maybe you have a specific need at in your current family dynamic that you want to learn more about this subject. There's always a context, and the context is observable. So, okay, so let's just set some quick foundational rules. So we know behavior happens within a specific context. Each of us have unique histories influencing how we interact with the context. So I always say it's like we're human beings are very similar, but we're all little snowflakes because our unique histories, how we were raised, where we were raised, the people that we were with. If anyone spent time with their family over Thanksgiving, you could see like, oh, even the good and the not so good things about our family members, you see how much it's shaped and created the person that you are today. So yeah, we are all little snowflakes, but there is a context for that. And then what happens closest to the behavior, either immediately before or after, typically have the biggest influence. So I'm hoping that after this, we can all keep it really simple. So I always tell people like the explanation that involves the least amount of assumptions is probably the most correct one. So, a lot of times we want to overanalyze and overthink things, but I always say keep it simple, and the most obvious explanation is probably the most accurate one, actually. Okay, so the ABCs. So this stands for antecedent, behavior, and consequence. And we refer to this as a three-term contingency because there's a direct relationship with all of these things, and I'm going to try and elucidate this. But the behavior is a thing that we really focus on in ABA, but there are things that happen before, which is our antecedents, and things that happen after, which are our consequences. So let's delve a little bit further, and I'll kind of show you how these are all connected. So antecedents are anything that happens before a behavior. So some common ones for kids' behaviors, for the not so good behaviors that you might not want to see, the protesting things. Hey, it's time to brush our teeth. It's time to do our homework. It's time to log on to distance learning. Time to eat your veggies. Time to clean your room. Time to be done with electronics or video games. For all the parents here, I don't even have to tell you what behavior I'm talking about. You probably already know what happens after some of these things when you have to say them. So yeah, when we're referring to the antecedents, we're just referring to things that happened before. Sometimes it's nothing at all. And you're like, well, nothing was happening right before. And there might be a reason for that once we get into the functions. So the behavior stands for anything that human beings say, think, or do. You can get really kind of deep into that, but really it's just anything that we do basically is a behavior, including our thoughts, but that's kind of for a more advanced kind of level. So with kids, we just kind of stick to what we can observe. Behavior is a window into the mind. If you all notice about yourself, even I don't know if anyone's done any level of like meditation or introspective thinking, but you start to learn a whole lot about how your physical movements are even related to your thought process or things. I know when I'm really stressed, I start to kind of do this. And when I'm thinking about something I could have done better, I start tapping my foot. And it really is a window into people's minds. And so when you see your kids acting a certain way, you're really seeing how they're feeling, you're seeing what they're thinking, and a whole bunch of other things. Okay, so consequences in an ABA term is just the things that happen after a behavior, and either two processes can happen. Either reinforcement takes place, which is going to increase future behaviors, or punishment is going to take place and it's going to decrease future behavior. ABA has some lingo that it makes us have to rewire the way that we think about things a little bit. And when I say punishment and reinforcement, it doesn't necessarily mean what we think should be reinforcement and punishment. So some really quick, why we always, from an ABA perspective, we will always focus on reinforcement over punishment. One, because most people know, hey, you can take something away, you can do X, Y, or Z. But really, when it comes down to it, reinforcement teaches us what to do. Punishment typically says what you're doing is wrong, when reinforcement teaches you, hey, what you're doing is good, productive, and we want to see more of it. Punishment does not necessarily provide you with a replacement behavior. It just says, don't do that. And for anyone who grew up with some level of punishment, you kind of have to learn the hard way. Okay, don't do this, don't do that, don't do this. But it's like, what should I do? When you take a reinforcement-based approach, you're really keying in on exactly what you want somebody to do and focusing in on that. So it's actually a teaching strategy as well. So some common misconceptions is reinforcement is only reinforcement if something is increasing, and punishment, reprimands, other forms of common punishment strategies might actually be reinforcing the behavior. So for any parent who has multiple kids, and what works for your oldest kid does not work for your youngest kid and you're like, why the heck isn't this working? I'm doing the same thing. It just means that what's a reinforcer for one of your kids is not. So the common example in a classroom setting, and a lot of parents, you might have seen this with your own kid, is a kid calls out in class and the teacher says, raise your hand before you unmute yourself, don't call out. And for the rest of the class period, the kid is silent, doesn't say anything. And then another kid, that unmutes themselves, teacher has to say the same thing. And for the rest of the class, the kid is unmuting himself more, calling out even more. So for one kid, punishment occurred, and one kid, reinforcement occurred, even though the teacher responded the same way to both of them. So this is where it comes, where you actually have to observe kind of what's going on and seeing what's happening with your child to understand, wait, I yelled at them, but they keep doing this. That's showing you that that's not being an effective tool, and we have to find a different strategy to use. Any questions on any of those kind of basic framework questions? Okay, we'll keep going. So let's look at the ABCs in motion. I always like to use the analogies of our phones, because our phones are great behavior analysts. They know exactly what we like and what we don't like. So here we have the antecedent is a phone call from this person's wife. The behavior is, we accept this call, and the consequence is, oh, it looks like he did something well, he took out the trash, he did everything that he needed to do, he's a smiling person. So more likely in the future to accept the call when, his wife calls, right? For this person, wife called, behavior accepted. Uh-oh, probably forgot to do something. Maybe there's some corrective feedback for this person. So here we have incoming call, and I don't know about you, but typically that's like a robocall or somebody you don't know. So you accept it, and oh, your behavior has been punished. You're upset. So in the future, you see this incoming call and you decline that, and you're a very happy person and you go on with your day. So as you can see, the antecedent in all of these are really the same thing. Your phone is ringing, but depending on your relationship and your history with what is happening on your phone in this antecedent changes what your behavior is, right? So it's not like it's all the same. So finally, why do we actually study this ABCs? We see patterns, we understand things. Like, we actually want to know why somebody's doing something, because once we know why a kid, a person, anybody is doing something, then we can figure out an intervention and a way to change that and to figure out a replacement behavior. We're not just studying people just for the sake of studying people. We're trying to figure out what we can do to make a meaningful change. So what are our functions? Our functions are really every single behavior can come down when you really look at it into one of four categories or a combination kind of. So we either do things to escape or avoid things. And what that behavior is communicating is, this is too hard, this is unpleasant, I don't want to do this, or I really need help with something. So for anyone who has a child who's really engaging in a lot of escape avoidance with school, with certain tasks, it's really might be saying that this is too hard and I get too frustrated during this, and it's causing me to experience a lot of stress and anxiety. So when I'm seeing that, it's informing what we need to do in that. It's not just like, oh, well, they're choosing not to do it. There might be something a little bit more to there. So another function that we identify is attention. So this is really saying, look at me. I need people to look at me. And a lot of times kids learn that they're the most effective with getting attention when they're behaving badly. And this is at no fault of anyone. It's not at a fault of a teacher at all. It's just, a teacher has 30 kids to look after at once, and, making an out of turn comment might get them more attention than being on task. So when we identify that this is the function, the primary function for a kid we're working with, we try and find more creative ways for them to get attention. For some kids, if they don't have great social skills, it may just be working on, hey, this is how you go and say hello to someone. This is how you can go join a conversation, join a group. Next function, we have tangible access. So this is like, I want something, give me something. When I'm with my new hires and we're doing a training, I'm like, hey, everybody is here. And trust me, if we were not paying everybody, nobody would be here at a new hire training. It results in something. And, for a lot of our a lot of our kids, it's simple things like I want computer time. I want my favorite snack. Um, I want to be able to watch TV for a little bit longer. So when we know this, we try and get our kids in the mindset of earning those things as opposed to just they're being taken away. And then finally, we have sensory or an automatic. So this is, it feels good. When we're stressed out, we might twirl our hair or we might, do a self-soothing. For anyone who has a child with on autism spectrum disorder, there might be a lot of behaviors where we're like, why are they doing this? And it's typically a self-soothing. You're either oversensitive or undersensitive to things. And there might be behaviors that serve strictly a sensory function to it. So once we know what the function is, because we've identified the ABCs, that's going to let us know what we need to teach, because really behaviors communication, our job is to teach better means of communicating, right? So this is a really quick, this is a cheat sheet that I give when I'm training new staff is, okay, let's do a practice. So this first one, it says, the child grabs for cookies and the mom says no. The behavior is the child screams, hits the mom, and the mom's just like, whatever, dude, like, take it easy, take your cookies. I've had a long day. You don't know what I've been through. So if we're analyzing this from the child's behavior, I'm thinking, oh, okay, this is access for the child. For the mom, she's just trying to avoid a bigger deal, right? So she's like, hey, take the cookie. It's no big deal for me right now. But this just kind of shows the relationship that it takes from two different partners within an ABC. So we have the ABCs for the child, and the antecedent for the mom would be the child screaming and hitting her. And the behavior is she gives the child cookies. The consequence for her would be, I get to avoid a bigger tantrum. In this next one, we have the dad talking on the phone. And this is one of those which might seem like, well, nothing was happening. I wasn't doing anything with my kid. And then the child throws a toy, looks straight at his dad. Dad gets off the phone, reprimands his child. We'd probably say, hey, nothing was really happening in this antecedent. It's probably an attention-based thing, and they probably just wanted attention from you. So even though the dad got off the phone and reprimanded the child, that actually might have served as a reinforcer that the kid knows, okay, if I really need to get dad to come over and pay attention to me, I can kind of do this. And then finally, we have one that says, mom says it's time for homework. Child runs away from mom to his room. And then finally, the consequence is child just plays with his toys in his room. Mom has to do errands. She's got a busy life as well. In this one, we're like, okay, he probably didn't want to do homework, so he's avoiding or escaping something. So this is just kind of how we would take a very simple approach to identifying what the primary function is, because that's going to give us the framework for what we're going to do next, which is teaching the replacement behaviors, which is really what it comes down to. And that's where the hard work comes. Hopefully now that you have these tools, you're like, okay, I know exactly why my kid's doing it. And now it's like, now what? Okay, so any questions before we can move on understanding the ABCs, if that made sense? If you have any questions about any of your kids' behaviors where you're like, I have no idea why this is going on. What is the function of this?
Are some kids, though, will exhibit more than one of those? They will at times want to avoid, and then other times it might be attention, right? So you have to.
Absolutely. And not only that, sometimes things start off as, I don't want to do this, and now everything is attention. And that's when it gets really tricky. So yeah, that's why I say it's like the principles that we have are very simple, but the application in real time is these things are happening really quickly. And yes, it's some kids might have a proclivity for like, hey, this is I'm a middle child, so I was an attention seeker. But that doesn't mean that I also had my escape avoidance behaviors and my access behaviors too. So yes, you're absolutely right that it could be multiple and all of those things depending on the situation. But yeah, and I think that what it kind of comes down to is in the moment, sometimes to know what to do in the moment, we have to react really quickly. And if you're able to see, hey, in this particular moment, this is what this is, it's going to inform how you respond to it. So, okay, so we're going to get into teaching strategies. And I always say I focus on modeling as one of the best teaching strategies that we do, because really what you can do and what your kids are looking at from you is you're the first model of behavior and how to be a functioning human being that they're ever going to see. And you are the most important way that you can teach your kid is just by doing what you want them to do as well. It sounds simple, but it's very tough in application. Okay, so first we need to identify a replacement behavior. So we know what the function is, and that's going to let us know that we need to replace that with something better. So I would say if anyone's ever tried to change your own behavior before, you realize how tough this is, right? We've all tried to make modifications to our diet, trying to get more sleep, try to spend less time on things, right? And hey, if we're trying to get rid of something in our diet, what do we always have to do instead? We don't want to drink soda anymore. It's like, hey, let's drink some San Pellegrino or some carbonated water. If we're trying to spend less time watching TV, maybe we're like, okay, I got to go run instead of binging that extra show on Netflix. But really, when we're working with our kids too, we always need to teach them something else to do. We can't just expect them to do nothing. That's not, we would be falling short as educators if that's what we did. It's not just, hey, don't do that. It's like, this is what you can do instead, and we're going to teach you. So a good place to start is always to teach a kid to use their words. Or engage in a behavior that has a similar outcome. So something that we'll do with our kids to start, and when I come into a school, a lot of times teachers will be like, if I'm working with a kid who likes to escape things and knows that, hey, I can run out of the classroom and be out for 6 hours and not do a thing, a lot of times teachers will be like, you give them too many breaks. And I'm like, I know we give them a lot of breaks, but they already know that if at any point, their challenging behavior can get them out of anything. So it's much better for a kid to say, hey, I need a break. This is a little hard for me. And reinforce that versus reinforcing eloping behavior or just, anything else that might produce escape for them. So once we've identified a replacement behavior, and really we tie this all back to the function. So I'm just going to go back over here really quick. So everything's tied back to these functions. So if we're trying to teach something else for escape avoidance, once again, break is a great place to start. Asking for help is a good place to start with them. If somebody always wants attention, then we're going to try and find a replacement behavior for that. A lot of times kids might learn to push somebody for attention, and we teach kids to say, hey, here are some intro phrases that you can use with your friends. For some of our class clowns, we work on like, hey, this is a way to tell a more appropriate joke with your classmates, or this is how you can raise a hand and get your teacher's attention. And now in the Zoom era, it's how to either wait patiently or hit the raise hand function. We've had to teach these new behaviors that produce that. And then what we really want to do as a replacement behavior for our kids who always want access is teaching them how to earn things as opposed to things just kind of being taken away. So how we get there is by being a model. This means keeping your cool when things get tough. I've had to recommend to parents a lot of times, like, hey, if you're feeling stressed out and and the situation is feeling a little overwhelming, it is 100% okay to say, I need a break to your child. This is demonstrating to your kid that when things get tough, it is appropriate to ask for a break and to remove yourself from a situation. This is very tough when we're in the heat of the moment, right? And we're adults and we know that this is tough. When we're arguing with our spouses, we know like, hey, I don't need to say that extra thing. Like it's never gonna help the situation, right? But we just can't help it sometimes, and we're adults. So for our kids, for us to expect our kids to keep their cool when we're not is not really teaching in that way. So this also means doing what you want them to do. A lot of times our kids don't want to take out the trash. They don't want to clean their room, but hey, I'm going to come help you. Let's do this together. And I'm going to kind of show you how this is done. You might get a lot further with that. And then finally, the avoiding power struggles. I always say, and every kid and their temperament is different, but if you ever find yourself in a power struggle, just know that no one's winning that one, because the longer that you engage in that power struggle to win it is showing your kid really that, okay, when I'm in a conflict with a peer or when I'm in a conflict with somebody, I need to just outlast them and I'll win it. So I always say, if you're in a power struggle, that's a great opportunity to say, you know what, let's both cool down. I need a break. You need a break. I'm going to take 5 minutes. When you're feeling better, you can come talk to me. And that's a great place to start with modeling. Okay, so use your child's interest to teach and motivate. So if something's not fun, your kid won't want to learn. So if your kid loves Mario, so my niece is like obsessed with Mario characters and Yoshi and all of these things, and it's a great teaching method to get her interested in math. Like, how many Yoshis do we see? In ABA we do things called preference assessments, and we see, okay, what are the things that our kids like, because we need to embed reinforcement and motivation into our teaching. Otherwise, we're not going to be very effective. So everything comes down to motivation. And when your kid has something that they actually like to do, and it's paired with something that's maybe not more non-preferred, they're going to be much more likely to engage in it. So if you know your kid loves Pixar movies or Toy Story, don't shy away from using that to motivate your kid, and pairing it in some of those more non-preferred things. For your kids who don't like brushing their teeth, you might have like a SpongeBob toothbrush or something cool, because you're using your interest to kind of pair that with it. So never be shy to use your child's interests, and definitely embrace them when you're trying to teach a new skill. Okay. So some reinforcement strategies that will help teach. So something that is good is to tell your child exactly what they did that you're proud of. And a lot of times when you just say, wow, very good job, this doesn't necessarily teach your kid exactly what, they might parrot that, okay, I was kind of doing my work. But for our kids who have a hard time trying, I always like to focus on like, wow, you did such a good job trying. A big thing in ABA is we always reinforce attempts, because what we really want to see is perseverance skills. Like, you're going to fail a million times. All of us adults know that most of us have failed millions of times, and that's how we've kind of got to where we are, by learning from those things. So for our kids who kind of develop that, unmotivated or kind of scared to fail, we really want to point out when they're trying and focusing on that. Focusing on what your child doesn't have a proclivity for as well is really good. I'm sure everyone knows what their child's strengths are. And those are the things that they're always going to kind of have as a head start in, compared to other people. But focusing on, hey, this is actually really hard. I know that it's really hard for you to, when it's time to be all done with video game time, but I love that you kept your cool. That was really awesome, and that you listened. So the more kind of descriptive that we can be describing what our kids did that we are proud of, the better. And this is something that's always available to us. And something I always share with parents too is, your attention is so valuable to your child. It's honestly the biggest reinforcer that only you have access to. Like, nobody else's attention is quite as valuable as yours. Granted, until they're teenagers, and then it's mainly their friends. but still, you will always have something that nobody else has to offer. So your attention is super valuable. So the way that you are able to provide that attention is really going to be one of your best reinforcement strategies. So for access maintain things, we love to shift the mindset. So I was just working with a family with a little one who's in TK right now, and going through being a student for the first time in distance learning. And one of the biggest things that we've been working on is shifting the wording. Hey, you're not going to lose these things. These things aren't yours to lose. It's like, hey, when you finish your work, this leads to favorable outcomes. And teaching kids that it's up to them to earn things really is a great life skill in general moving forward. As adults, we all know that if we don't put hard work into things, we don't move up, or we don't we get what we earn. We have to earn everything that we do. And the more that we can kind of get our kids in this mindset of, hey, it's up to you. Like, we really want to see you succeed, and setting them up for success, the better. And then finally, for escape things, give your kids break. A break is a very powerful reinforcer. Your kid needs breaks. You need breaks. If you set up reasonable expectations, you set your child up for success. And then I always like to say, meet your child where they're at and not where you want them to be. And don't be afraid in this distance learning age to have an open conversation with your teachers about this as well. So I have a few kids in special day classes, and we were seeing some aggressive behaviors that we typically just don't see. And it's really because the day was way too long. It was, going straight into a class and doing that for an hour, then 30 minutes with a specialist, then APE, then back into another virtual class. And the parent was, trying their best to just, hey, let's just muscle through. We gotta be through this. And it's like, hey, no, we need to take breaks. That's what this behavior is communicating. He's saying like, hey, I need a break right now, and I don't know how else to ask for this, and I'm getting to the frustration zone. And we always want to avoid that frustration zone, because once we get there, really all you can do is wait it out and think, okay, what can we do differently next time? So I'm sure, everyone who's going through distance learning right now has seen this somewhat. And once again, don't be afraid to give your kids breaks when they need that, and teach them that, hey, you can ask for breaks and we will reinforce you for that. So, okay, so finally, this is my last section, and this is about being proactive and not reactive. And this is where it all comes. So you have all the tools that you know how to assess behavior. You are the expert of your kids' behavior. You're with them. You've been with them since the day they were born. You know exactly what's going to happen in certain situations. So I always say you are the expert of your child's behavior. Don't expect anything different to happen when you already know what's going to happen. So a lot of times I'll get phone calls from parents, and they'll be like, a tantrum has happened, and they're full-blown tantrum mode. And it's like, what do I do right now? And it's like, now you gotta wait. But next time, what can we do differently? And it's not a super popular answer to tell people, but sometimes, when we get frustrated, sometimes all you can do is wait it out. I've spent hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours and hours of my life waiting it out with kids in different settings, whether it be in a classroom, whether it's in a, in a kid's kitchen, and being like, hey, it's okay, we'll get through this. Like, we're here, we don't judge anything. But I know all we can do is wait it out at some point. We have a center at Learning Behavior Center in Tarzana, and one of our kids, he's learning for the first time certain limits and learning how to turn take and share with peers. And we know when he gets to a certain level, all we can kind of do is wait it out. And, the biggest thing I've been reviewing with the staff that's working with this kid is, it's okay if we have to wait him out. And he's been making so much improvement, and things have been getting so much better. Sometimes it seems like, oh, there's behaviors happening right now, things aren't going well. You learn more sometimes through waiting those things out and being patient. In the long run, sometimes it actually will do most of the teaching. But after that, we know, okay, what are we going to do different on the proactive end, and not expect anything different to happen. So wise sage once said, fool me once, shame on you. Fool me twice, we all know how that goes, right? We should know a little bit better at this point. So it's like, okay, there's been so many times when I'm working with a kid for the first time, and I'm like, okay, you got me there, you got me there, you got me there. But I'm like, okay, next time I'm going to set both of us up for success a little bit more. So I'm going to give you my favorite strategies that I share with anyone. And if all you kind of take home from the strategies that we reviewed today are some of these, then I'll be happy, because they're very effective. So once again, you're the expert on your child. Don't expect a change if you haven't changed anything on your end about your behavior. So okay, so the number one, power of choice. Choices are great for kids who engage in a lot of power struggles. They're also just great for kids in general. Choices provide kids with some control over their lives. Choices lead to increased compliance, even for the not so fun stuff. So if I'm working with a kid and I know that, hey, we got to do homework and it's math time, and math is the most difficult subject for this kid, I'm going to find as many choices as I could possibly give this kid that ultimately result in the outcome of completing math. So, maybe we're not all driving quite as much as we used to, but, when it's 5 p.m. and it's time to get home, and you pop in Waze, it's going to give you 3 million different routes that you can take. Maybe you're jumping off the freeway here, but ultimately they all result in you getting home, right? So that's kind of how I view choices. Is we don't want to say, hey, do you want to work or do you not want to work at all? That would be a not so good choice. But some good choices might be, okay, it's time to do math. Do you want to work inside, or should we go work outside? I want to work outside today. Cool. Should we work with a pencil or do you want to work with a crayon today? Awesome. You want to use a pencil? Cool. Do you want to use your SpongeBob pencil or a Spider-Man pencil? And maybe the kid's feeling into comic books lately. They're like, I want to use the Spider-Man pencil. And then you're like, okay, should we work on the first problem or the second problem? And you'd be surprised at how just providing these little choices redirects a kid's mind from being stressed out about doing math to being like, oh, I actually have a choice in this situation. And there's all kinds of choices that you can give. So for the example of doing something that's not so fun, right? Brushing your teeth. This is, if you have trouble getting your kid to brush your teeth, just know that you're not alone. There are very many people. It's very tough. So if your kid hates brushing their teeth, how can you use choices to increase buy-in? So, well, here's some examples. When do you want to brush your teeth? Should we do it right after dinner so we get it out of the way? Or do you want to do it before we read our bedtime story? Hey, should we use different choices of toothpaste for some of our kids who get a little bit picky on certain things? It's like, we've got this special toothpaste or this one. I've had some families have different toothbrushes and it's like on different days a kid will choose a different one to use. Choices of an activity or a reinforcer to do afterwards, how long they brush their teeth for. I'm not a dentist, so I don't want to say like, I know 2 minutes is like what we should all aim for, but hey, if you tell your kids to do it for 90 seconds and you get buy-in from them, I think that that's totally okay as well. And then sometimes, hey, do you want to brush your teeth alone in the bathroom or do you want mom and dad to come with you? Some of our kids like being completely independent. They're like, no, I'm a big kid. I could do this on my own. And some kids are like, oh, mom and dad will do this with me. That makes things a little bit better. And pairing this with another teaching strategy, now you have the ability to model like, all right, this is how we do it. And, it's an opportunity to interact with your kid and hopefully make the non-preferred activity a little bit more preferred because your attention is very valuable and they get to, spend some more time with you. Okay, so our next strategy, it's a very simple one. It's sometimes referred to as grandma's rule, but it's as simple as a first then. So when you know what your kid is really motivated for and you know what they have to do for the day, whether that's homework, whether that's brushing their teeth, whether that's getting dressed before you have to go to an outing of some sort, make sure that you have the first be the non-preferred thing that's harder to get to and the then being something very reinforcing. So some very common examples. First, eat your veggies, then you can have ice cream. I don't think too many of us have been successful if we say, hey, first eat all of this ice cream and then you got to eat some broccoli afterwards. Probably doesn't work out like that. First, do your homework, then you can play video games. Don't do it the opposite way around either. I tell myself this so many times because I feel like a hypocrite if I don't. There's many times when I come home from work and I'm like, okay, I just want to zone out, play music, play guitar, do something. And I'm like, I know I have chores to run and I have to take the trash out. So I'm going to do that first before I do other things because I already know what happens. But what's great about this strategy is kids always tell you what they want, right? They're like, I want this. I want to go here. I want to do this. I want to do that. When you know what their motivation is in the moment, it gives you the power and the tools to say, okay, let's first finish this thing that you don't always want to do before we have access to that. And it also gets kids in the mindset of, hey, when I do something, maybe that's a little bit more non-preferred, that actually leads to better outcomes than when I, try and throw a tantrum over it. And I know that that's not going to lead to the outcome that I want because mom and dad are really good at following through with things. So first then, once again, is a very effective strategy to utilize. Okay, so priming of expectations is a very simple one. It's probably one of the most simple things that we can do. And it's literally just telling a kid what to expect, how to behave, what they can earn. Like before entering a known trigger situation, you're letting your kid know exactly what's going to happen and what they can do in that situation. So at the beginning of this training, I gave everybody a little bit of an agenda. That was me priming you. Hey, today, this is the things that we're going to talk about. These are the things that we're going to kind of learn. If that list was 100 pages long, you guys would be like, yeah, I'm going to zone out. I'm going to log off and maybe I'll check the recording so I could fast forward a little bit. But it really comes to with our kids as well. When they know what to expect, it's going to help them cope with the situation a lot better. A lot of times when kids are having a really hard time is when they don't know how long something's going to last. It's like, it's time for math. And they're like, how long is it going to be? If you say, hey, we're going to do 2 problems and then we can take a break, you're going to have a lot more buy-in when the kid knows, okay, this is all that's happening. So here's a scenario, and this is one that I like to use because I relate to it very well. So a scenario is, it's time to go to Target, you got to run some errands and you need to bring your child. So in this scenario, my wife has to go to Target and run her errands, and I'm kind of the child. And I'm like, okay, how many candles are we going to smell? What are we going to look at? Are we going to go through the clothes section for how long? Like, I need to know these things. Otherwise I start to kind of misbehave and stress out a little too. So if this is a similar sounding scenario for you and your kids, things to prime your child on could include how long you're going to be in the store, what you need to buy, if they have any time to look at the toy section or not. This is a good thing to kind of review beforehand, how your child is expected to behave, and if, hey, are there any reinforcers that you want to throw in there? Sometimes a little added incentive is fine. Hey, if you can do a good job following the rules, we can get ice cream on the way home. That's a 100% okay thing to prime your kid on, as long as it's happening before the behaviors and not after. Otherwise it turns into a little bit of a bribe. So we say it's being a proactive strategy if you're doing it before your kid's engaging in any behaviors, and it's kind of a bribe if you do it after, and we wouldn't encourage you to do that. Other scenarios might be like, hey, we're about to join math class and it's distance learning. Remember, we're on math class from 10:15 to 11:25. If you need a break, remember, you can tell me. If you want to get the teacher's attention, remember, you have to either raise your hand, and we keep ourselves muted. So your teachers, you're probably already hearing that probably sounds very similar to what your teachers are already saying too. They're priming your kids what to expect. But if you know that there's certain things that are specific to your child, make sure to review that with them beforehand, and kind of with some of the sessions that we're doing with our students that we work with, for a lot of our kids, we're doing, before they join their virtual classrooms, we're doing a session with them for 15 to 30 minutes. And we're reviewing the rules of the day, because we don't have a lot of opportunities as BIIs and BID providers to jump in once the class is going. So we've shifted this to a distance learning format, like, okay, remember, this is what you got to do. Or our BIIs are communicating with the parents to be like, hey, remember to let them know that they have time with their occupational therapist at 10:30. Remember to let them know about it. So once again, when we prime people, we're all set up for success a little bit more. Okay, arranging the environment is a super important one, especially with everybody having to work from home. So for me, this involves, I put this keyboard in place of this keyboard, because I know if I have this one on my desk, which is I usually have it, I'm not going to be as productive working. So I like to set things up a specific way to be for success. If your kid gets easily distracted, and you have a bunch of stuff on their desk, you are setting them up to get distracted very easily. So clean, tidy spaces. For some of our kids, if they're sitting right next to a window that's a busy street, that's going to be a very hard place for them to stay focused. So for distance learning, even though this is in the home, I've recommended to most of my families that I work with to try and simulate somewhat an actual school day and a school environment. And that might involve having a specific desk that is specific just for them doing their distance learning, having some visuals in place that they can kind of see, and really just trying to set them up for success, making sure that they have all the materials that they need beforehand. If that's their Chromebook, pencils, scratch paper, anything that the more that you can have the environment arranged prior to their virtual classes, the better. And this is something that when we're working in person at schools, we're always very mindful of. For our kids who like to run out of the classroom, we typically don't want to have them right next to a door. So they at least have the opportunity to, hey, do you need a break? Remember, you can tell us, and then you can kind of go. So I know that the virtual classroom is basically the new school is your home. So I definitely don't want you to change everything about your home, but if there are any minor tweaks that you can do for a workspace for your child that will simulate more of a school day, it's definitely very helpful. Okay, so moving into that, visual supports. Visual supports are extremely helpful, and you all know your child better than anybody. Some of us, you can tell us everything. We remember. I'm not that person. I need visuals. This is my to-do list for the day, and I check things off. If I don't do this, I get super distracted. So for any parent who has a child with ADD or ADHD, visuals, checklists, things to keep your kid focused, are going to be extremely helpful for some of our kids who have a hard time with their morning routine. Having a checklist of what they need to do in the morning time to get ready for school can be really helpful, and teaching a kid how to use that independently is going to be extremely helpful. So other examples might be a timer. So this might involve, hey, mommy has to talk on the phone for the next 10 minutes, or I've got to do a Zoom meeting of my own, and I need you to provide to give me that space. If a kid's just like, well, I don't know how long your Zoom meeting's going to last, it might be more stressful for them than if it's like, hey, I'm going to set a timer for 20 minutes. In 20 minutes, when that goes off, you can come knock on my door. And this could be used in a bunch of different ways. Some of our kids, we make coping skills charts. So obviously for our young ones, and it's hard to remember, hey, when something doesn't go my way, I can act a different way, because your fight or flight mechanisms are triggered. And even though it might seem innocuous and simple, that's like, oh, your favorite YouTube video didn't come on and now you're throwing a fit. Like, it might seem silly, but their fight or flight mechanisms can be triggered in simple ways like that. And teaching a kid, hey, these are the strategies that we use, are other ways. And I'll show examples right now of kind of some of these things. So simple timers like this, these are really effective ways, especially the ones that are visual. It gives a visual component, and it lets a kid know how long they need to be somewhere. Sometimes if you're trying to set limits on the use of electronics as well, or video game time, setting timers up like this is also really effective. It lets a kid know exactly how long they have with something. And then it also sets you up with a great opportunity to teach them how to request for more time, as opposed to throwing a tantrum when something doesn't go their way. But yeah, and even for your kids who, if anyone has a child who is nonverbal, these timers are really good. And you'd be surprised how much your kid probably actually understands of language, even if they're not able to produce it on their own. So some other examples include, here's like a basic morning routine checklist. So, and this is something that you can teach your kid to learn how to check off on their own. We all do this. I'm literally have been doing it all week on my tasks to do. And it's really effective. And for us adults, if you're having a hard time with it, there's a lot of cool apps that you can do it on as well. But checklists are really helpful. When I go to the store, my wife has gotten really good at using a bunch of these strategies on me. She will give me the list, and she's learned that if she puts it in my wallet, I'm much better at getting everything that she needs. My wife's an emergency room nurse, and she has like her own routine of doing things. So it's like, I need this coffee, I need this specific type of creamer and this. I'm like, all right, I'm going in. And before she learned to do this list with me, I would forget at least 3 things always. So once again, for our kids with ADHD, and where you're trying to teach more independence, visual schedules like this are really helpful. Okay, this is an example of like an emotions thermometer, and this is a good way to teach your kids how they're feeling and how to pair it. So luckily, we had this awesome movie, Inside Out, that taught kids about emotions and feelings, but it's a really cool way to learn how to, we call these TACs in ABA, but it's really a way of describing your internal states, right? Like, I can't see your emotion, I can just see how you're acting, and I know how you feel in a certain way. But teaching a kid how to, like, oh, I'm getting a little upset right now, and I'm not quite a red, but I'm feeling like I'm in the yellow zone. That's an intervening phase. And when you can get a kid to be able to pick up on the warning signs that they're getting somewhere, once they become more aware of something, and I think we all as adults know this too, when you become aware of something, that's the biggest step you could ever make in changing a behavior, is becoming aware of it. Like, we can't change things if we're not even aware of it. And getting our young kids, or even our kids with special needs who you think we can't get there, there are ways to get them to start picking up on these things, even if we have to prompt them a lot along the way. So this is just some example of one that I had with a specific child who really liked this dog. And this was me using his interest. This is Gabe the dog. I don't know if anyone knows who Gabe the dog is. I had no idea who Gabe the dog was, but this kid loved Gabe the dog, so I learned everything I could about him. And these were the strategies that we had for this particular child, who, when he would get upset, it would become a big deal in a school. And he made so much progress last year and is doing so well in distance learning. It's been really awesome to see. But here are some reminders: taking a break in the classroom. He can ask for help. They can walk to the garden. You can try and compromise with a friend. Think about something funny to get my mind off of it. Take a big, deep, slow breath and count to 10. And for anyone who has kids who you're trying to work on these coping skills, and if they're at an age where they can kind of think of some strategies on their own, we always encourage participation from our kids that we work with. Hey, so what do you think you should do? Like, when I'm feeling mad, I like to take a break, or sometimes I like to get my mind off of it by listening to music. What do you like to do? And this is like a way that you can involve your child in this process. And it's not just, hey, you should do this when you're feeling upset. And you might be surprised at what your child comes up with. I've been surprised many times when I'm like, wow, I should never assume anything about anybody, because I've been surprised so many times by what kids have to say. And sometimes it could be the deepest things. You'd be really surprised. Okay, so we have, this is an example of like a visual schedule using somebody's interests. Really liked Mario. This would be an example of like a replacement behaviors and what they can do. So remembering to ask for a break or help when something is hard, keep my hands and feet to myself. Okay. So finally, my final strategy that I'm giving you is to pick your battles and to sometimes avoid a difficult situation. Sometimes a good approach is just to avoid the battle altogether. I think your kids, I always say this, it's like you're the expert of your kid, but your kids are also the expert on your behavior, because they know how to push all of your buttons. And sometimes giving in is okay. It's, you've got so much on your plate right now that, honestly, let the small things slide sometimes, and you'd be surprised where that can kind of get you. Okay. So finally, I always like to share a specific story with a kid or a family that I've worked with. So I would like to share one with you all and just kind of show you how different things can be going into a year versus just 1 year later. So I remember working with a little girl, and we were going into the first grade, and she really hadn't been a student very much and was all over the place, was engaging in all kinds of behaviors, no compliance, difficulty listening to the teacher. And this was at a private school, and the teacher had no experience working with special education, and had a lot of concerns. And really, we just didn't think this was going to work out at first. But over time, we worked with the teacher. And not only the teacher, but we worked with the students in the classroom. And at first it was, oh, this kid is a little bit different, X, Y, or Z. By the end of the school year, the teacher was crying when it was time for the student to no longer be with her, and was just, she was marveling at how much she had learned from her experience working with this one child. And it's so great from my perspective I go somewhere once a week, I go somewhere twice a month, and to see the change that can happen over time. Behavior change is slow. It doesn't happen overnight. It's really hard work. But when you put in the work, really good things can happen. And once again, even if your kid isn't having the same verbal language as their peers, they can rise to that level, and they can start really developing friendships. And when I left this kid, she was in 3rd grade, and she had great friends. She was like the most popular kid in the school. It was really awesome to see. It's just cool to see something, cases where, someone can really shine when the adults working around them and the kids working around them, just put in the work. So anyways, well, thank you so much for listening to me talk. I hope that there was something beneficial that you took out of there. And once again, this is my contact information. Feel free to reach out at any time. I'm not a salesman, so trust me, I'm not going to try and sell you on anything. But if you ever have any questions on really anything that pertains to kids' behavior, motivation, finding right supports, IEP stuff, I've become a little bit of an expert in all that stuff over the past decade. So feel free to reach out to me at any time. And if there are any questions, I'm more than happy to answer them now.
Hey, Benjamin, can you hear me?
Yes.
Thank you so much. That is so informative. And I think it really is helpful to just break it down with my own child, who's a fourth grader. In addition to the kids that I'm currently working with, one of the things that I'm seeing is just the frustration that happens when the kids are at home all the time. And then we're asking them to do something which is very unusual, to be sitting in a classroom. And the kids are having challenges with their executive functioning, like sustained attention, task initiation, goal-directed persistence. And so I'm working with parents and my own child as well on how to increase their willingness to just stay in one place for a little longer than we would expect at school. And I'm having a lot of parents who are asking me to help them with additional tools to keep their children on task. I am doing some of the things that you suggest. I'm a big fan of frequent breaks and meeting the child where they are and acknowledging their emotional state and letting them have a moment. But then we want to try to pretty swiftly try to get them back on board with what's going on in the classroom. And that's a challenge that parents have never really had to do before.
Yes.
It's kind of new territory.
Yeah, and I think that you bring up a lot of great points. And one is, hey, yeah, we do want to give a lot of breaks, and we do want to meet a kid where they're at, but we also want to raise the bar frequently. We don't stay there. And so a lot of times making those systematic changes over time and having a game plan. So I worked with a kid once where he couldn't be in a classroom with other kids, really. He was really aggressive, and we had to work with him. He couldn't work for more than 1 minute at a time without completely tearing things down. It's the more extreme version of something like this. And we had to take a very systematic approach where it's okay, we're going to work for 5 minutes at a time, and then we're going to give a 5-minute break. And once we can see that he can do that successfully we had preset criteria. Okay, now we're going to raise the bar. We're going to raise the bar. You might not necessarily have to, and by the time we left working with this kid, he was on his own in a classroom, in a special day class. So we went quite far time in a year or so, but you can use a similar approach of having a plan of okay, how are we going to increase this total duration? And it might help to take some level of data on it. Because a lot of times it's the eyeball approach is great. And if you're really good at your job, you can do it. But even me, I'm oh, it's so helpful when you have data to kind of be oh, he's on task for an average of 5 minutes at a time for this week. And then you're oh, he's actually increased to 7 minutes. And that might not seem like a lot, but when you see that change and you've actually been monitoring it, it helps inform what you do. And something that I didn't really touch on today is data collection, because I'm not expecting parents to take data. I don't want to add an extra homework assignment. It's always been my most difficult thing to teach anyone. I've kind of just let that one slide. But from our perspective with our staff, we do collect data, and it does inform our decision making, because we want to know, okay, where are they actually at? So I'd say if you're working it with your son, you have all those tools, it may be helpful to take a baseline and be okay, in a given day, this is about how frequently that they can respond. And that's going to help inform you of using the various tools, because it's really not a cookie cutter approach. There's all these, there's so many different strategies that you got to have to individualize. And a lot of it is trial and error. I always say it's okay to try something and then, hey, how did that work? Hey, we tried to use a timer to increase the duration that they have to go for an extra minute or an extra 2 minutes, whatever that is. And then, hey, how did that go? And using that evaluative process of always trying to fine tune what you're doing is really going to be helpful. So I always say it's hey, try a bunch of different things. You have these different strategies. And why I focused with the assessment part to start is that's what it all comes down to. You see what's working, what's not working. And that's really going to be your biggest tool, is just being confident that you actually know what you're doing, and fine tuning things as you go.
I like that, because repetition is key. I work with so many parents are like, well, I tried it once or twice, and like, well, sometimes we have to try it a few more times because it takes a while to, to create those new neural pathways with our kids and help them find a new habit.
100%. And I would always say, I've had that so many times where it's like, no, we tried, it doesn't work. And I'm like, well, how did you try it? Because like, think of our own behavior. How many times have we started something new for 2 days? And then, I think most of the science kind of shows that like to create a habit, it takes 2 to 3 weeks minimum. And then even then, if you don't maintain that. So if you're trying something and you're getting beat down because it doesn't work right away, then you're going to be set up for failure a little bit. I would say like a 2-week window is a good time period to try any intervention before moving on, because once again, things typically get worse before they get better. So you kind of have to, I would always say like, make sure you're evaluating things, but give something enough time to work, because if you don't, then once again, you might not be able to kind of make it through that hump and see that, hey, it actually could have worked.
Ben, that's great. I'm just going to interrupt. Can you stop to share your screen for just a moment?
Yes.
So we have lots of positive feedback that is happening in your chat and your organization. I mean, I knew this was, I love your speech, but like, I love your presentation, which is why I called you in. But everything was it just laid it out and so nice and organized that I feel like people can at least walk away with one thing that maybe they can be like, oh, maybe I can try this today, or maybe I can try that. So it wasn't, and again, I'm a big fan of your keep it simple. So
yeah,
that applies for like special needs and for, elementary kids, and also even just teenager feelings and what's happening right now. So I really appreciate, and I appreciate you sharing your information to reach out as well. So we will also include that, we'll pass that along too for people who didn't get to you. Anyways, but there wasn't any other questions that came up, and I'm going to, if that's okay. Oh yes, Rebecca, go ahead. Go.
Sorry. I was just wondering if you could touch a little bit on siblings.
Sure.
Obviously, things are extra tough because they have no break from each other. Yeah. So any sort of, dynamics are exacerbated. And I know that with us, I have here's one, but like two very strong-willed young children who kind of can't stay away from each other, but also can't,
And we punch each other.
Yes. Yes. But more than half of the time, if I'm not actually there to witness everything that happened, like I don't know, like she started, and so usually my husband and my response is just like, I don't care, just separate and like, go to your room. So I don't know. If you have any advice on.
Yeah, for sure. And I definitely grew up, I was the middle child, and my younger sister, who I would say the hope for you is that me and my sister, we fought like so much as kids because we were like a year apart, and she's the person of my family that I see the most now. I'm like the closest to, so just a little bit of hope for you that things can get better from it. So one, I would say, just know that they are kind of what we were talking about with the ABCs of behavior is kids are reinforcing the behavior on their own. So siblings, like they create like little patterns that they're doing. Oh, I'm going to go do this, and they get upset, and then I'm going to cry, and then X, Y, Z is going to happen, and it becomes this little chain and pattern of their behaviors. When I'm working with siblings and we're trying to understand first that, hey, it's never going to be perfect, so don't expect that. But what we can do is try and set them up for success a little bit more. And sometimes creating like a group contingency for them might be helpful of, hey, there's something that you both need to do in order to earn this fun thing. Or create like more games that are team building and that they have to work together in order to complete something. And tying it back to like, hey, you guys have to work together to earn something. So a lot of times those group contingencies can help, where it's like, hey, if you guys really want this new video game that you guys are really talking about, or if you guys want to have movie night, you guys both need to do X, Y, or Z together, and kind of trying to set them up to like have a common goal that they both have to work towards. But once again, sometimes it's just like separating. And then when they get a little older, teaching them those bargaining and compromising skills, because once again, you can't kind of like be there at all of it. And you do sometimes, the owner of our company, she's got 2 little girls, and it's like so many times we're in meetings and she's just like, you guys got to figure it out. Like, in teaching kids how to figure things out is actually like one of the benefits of having siblings, is that, when you're in a tough situation with other peers, like, you have some of those tools. So I would say the more you can encourage them working together, the better. But yes, it's okay if it's not perfect. That is a normal thing as well.
Yeah, but Rebecca's right. It's a blessing and a curse during this time that, like, they have somebody else to play with. When we're in the situations of not being able to see a whole lot of people at once, but it's also like, then there's a lot of time spent together, and especially depending on the age difference. Yeah, for sure. So that's a really good question, because
yeah, and I've tried to say, why don't you guys work it out amongst yourselves, and usually it ends up in tears, and someone's been
yes, and that's where modeling might come in helpful, and it might be helpful for you and your spouse to demonstrate how you guys work things out, because I'm sure that you also have those moments where it's a little bit harder to work things out, and sometimes it's good to really exaggerate things, like, oh well, me and Daddy were having a moment, and like, this is what we did, but sometimes giving like those really big examples, or if there's ever like a movie or something that they really like, there's Disney movies, there's always great examples of like people working together as a team and trying to really highlight those. And that's where the kind of the modeling and the teaching comes in a little bit.
Thank you.
Yeah, thank you for asking. Yes, go ahead and ask. I see someone raising their hand.
Hi. I have a daughter who's 9, who's very sensitive and has always struggled with anxiety. But now with COVID, it's just through the roof. So I was hoping you might have some advice to help me deal with her anxiety.
Yes. One, I would start by listing out common triggers, so that like what, and trying, because anxiety is a behavior that like is very vague, but like we know what it is, and you could see it, and what it looks like for your child is a specific way, and what anxiety feels like because we've all experienced it. So it looks different for everyone. So I would first know what those trigger situations are for her, and then sometimes one of the most like for people dealing with things like phobias or like big anxieties, like what you really want to do is like systematic desensitization and prepare them to be in stressful situations, and that's where like the priming of expectations is a really helpful strategy before it. Because it's not good to completely avoid those situations. You do want to prepare, and this is so for anyone with social anxieties, this is a situation that's exacerbated that very much, right? It's like, hey, our kids already don't like playing with peers, they already get stressed out, and now we're just all at home. And so yeah, I would say, one, have a plan to try and gently target those. Don't be like, hey, let's rip the Band-Aid off and go completely in, because you don't want to cause any trauma. But for some of our kids, they might have a anxiety around a dog or loud noises like an assembly or something like that at a school. And when we know that causes a lot of anxiety, then we're going to be like, hey, we're going to prime them of what to do, because we know what their trigger situation is before we're going to have kind of a game plan. And then we're not going to expect them to just be in there for the whole hour as well. So it's kind of finding a way to ease into some of those trigger situations. So you're providing the opportunities to target it, but also being sensitive to knowing that that you're not going to get to where you want, like right overnight. But I think a good starting place is just to know exactly what those triggers are, and to see if your daughter knows if she can identify any of those triggers. And if she's able to kind of say, yeah, this is something that stresses me out, or these are those things, I think even her being able to have some level of a back and forth in that will help her be more aware of it. And then it's like, well, what do you think you should do in this type of situation?
Okay. Yeah, I think we've just had some deaths in our family. And then with COVID, she's so worried somebody else is going to die.
Yeah.
She's having really bad nightmares, and she's terrified to go anywhere. So it's a very unusual anxiety, I feel, right now.
And that's definitely something that I would also, encourage you to touch base with any of her other, like a physician, or if you ever did want to consult with potentially like a child psychologist on those types of things too, because you're right, it is kind of a completely new thing, and especially if you've experienced something like death in the family, that's very traumatic, and very serious. So I would definitely reach out to resources that deal with loss in the family, and there are some like social stories and things that exist. If you ever email me, I would be more than happy to compile some resources for you.
Oh, that would be wonderful. Thank you so much. This was so helpful. I'm so glad you did this. I really appreciate it. Thank you.
Yeah, Ben, thanks so much for your time. I know, I mean, what else are we going to do on a Wednesday night? But
this is the new norm. The new norm for things.
We just, because we're still here, we're still in the pandemic, and which is something we never thought, back in March, that this is what would happen. And, and certain behaviors are getting better and certain things are staying. And so, it's just important to have a community of like, of sound, of just, for a moment to be like, is this happening? Can I relate to you? Is this what's happening to your kid? Or what should I notice? And I just, because now it's the mental health, like now we're you know what I'm saying? Like, I think that's more of like,
we're all there.
Especially with the kids. But you're right. It still comes back to us as the parents, because we're so worried about them, like keeping them okay, that like, we have to make sure that we're okay modeling as well. So that's my
I would definitely encourage like Facebook has a lot of good groups, parent groups, things like that too. Like there is a big community of people out there. You'd be surprised. I think we hear all of the negative stuff about like and things like that, but there are some very nice people and some nice groups out there. So I always encourage people to find those communities, especially in this parents can always relate to each other, especially if you have kids with special needs, then it's even more kind of relating to that.
Absolutely. I know.
Yeah.
Absolutely. So, well, you are wonderful. Thank you, everybody, for joining. I'm going to call the meeting, if that's okay, unless you want to say.
Thank you so much for listening.
Yeah, no, please. So, and I will be happy to share your name around other local schools, just because I think you have a lot to share. So, anyways, all right, everybody. Yay for December. We made it.
Thank you.
Have a great day.
We almost have a holiday break, so good seeing everybody. Thank you so much for joining.